Welcome back, guys, to another episode, and today we are going to be talking about the college football playoff, all of the controversy surrounding it. Is there anything that we can do to fix this problem? I'll go ahead and give you some of my thoughts here in a second. All right, so it's been about a week since the final conference championship games were played, and also since they announced the 12-team playoff. There's a lot of controversy around it, and it's nothing new. There's always controversy every single year. Specific teams feeling like they got left out, some people feeling like we need to expand it even further. Some people want to go all the way back down to 4 or even 2 teams again. And so it's hard when we love this sport so much, but yet the ending is just so terrible. And there's a lot of factors that play into it. I'll try and sort of diagnose what I feel is going on, or at least my biggest beefs with the CFP, and maybe some remedies on how we can make this just a little bit better. Everyone's got ideas, so if you like mine or if you have any comments, feel free to go ahead and leave a comment. And if you are enjoying this content, feel free to like and subscribe. But first off, let's talk about my beefs with the college football playoff. And my first one isn't necessarily a bash on the CFP, because they have nothing to do with it. But as a result of how we got here, the biggest issue, or one of the biggest issues that I have, is how big these conferences have gotten, and especially the elimination of divisions. And it's ironic that as the conference football landscape has grown, the playoffs have grown to more teams, we've made it more murky and harder to differentiate who are the strongest teams from each of these conferences. And the idea, what they wanted to accomplish first, is they were tired of having divisions and division champions who weren't that great, but they maybe beat up on the weak division of that conference, then going in and having a chance of upsetting somebody who maybe was on the cusp of a playoff or something like that. So a lot of these conferences went away from divisions to try and ensure and get the 2 best teams in their conference championship game. But that didn't really seem to work now, did it? Because you had a situation where Duke, who has 5 losses, ended up in the conference championship game, while Miami, the number 12 ranked team at the time, got to sit at home. We'll go ahead and talk about all of that here in a second. But what is fascinating to me is that we think that all of these conferences and these teams that are playing, that these schedules can actually be comparable to each other because they're in the same conference. We're no longer at that stage anymore. These teams might as well be in different conferences. Take, for example, Texas A&M. 7 of their 8 conference games were against the 7 bottom teams in their conference, in the SEC, whereas you have teams like Texas and Alabama who had to play multiple ranked teams. The one team that Texas A&M played, where they were ranked, they got smoked by Texas. And so you're sitting at a 1-loss Texas A&M still being ranked ahead against a 3-loss Texas team, but it can pretty much be safe to say that Texas team might actually be better, or they proved it on the field that they're better. Yet also, we're supposed to think that because Texas A&M plays in the SEC, that their schedule or their path was a lot harder than, say, some other team in the Big 12 or ACC. But that isn't the case, because they beat up on all of the bottom dwellers of the conference. So I think, first of all, we'll talk about some things that I feel like we need to do to improve that. But that has been a big stain on this year's conference scheduling and just conference perception in general. And it isn't getting any better. As I'm recording this video, it was announced that the ACC, half of their teams were going to play 9 conference games, and the other half were going to be playing 8 teams. How are we supposed to sort out who the best teams are in these conferences? Speaking of the ACC, I already mentioned that theirs is a mess, but to me, I just don't think it makes sense. We all know that Miami is a better team than Duke, but if you want like a playoff with integrity, it does not make sense that a team that won the conference is not going to a playoff, while a team that sat at home and didn't even compete for their conference championship gets to go in as an at-large. I get the logistical parts of everything, so you don't need to explain to me, oh, well, Miami was ranked higher, that's why. I know, but it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that one team gets to sit at home, the other team gets to play and earns their way as conference champions, yet has to sit on the sidelines. If you want to, I think the entire conference should have been left out, and the ACC needs to figure out a better way to figure out their tiebreakers. And this leads me to my next point about making sure that the best teams get in the conference championships and rankings in general, really. I think preseason rankings are a joke. I know that the CFP doesn't do them, but you can't tell me that the CFP doesn't see the rankings from the AP starting out and that they don't have a small bias or aren't influenced in any way by those rankings. And then the fact that they do weekly rankings, all they do is they paint themselves into a corner over and over again, and then they have to try and justify why they changed their rankings or why they changed their criteria on how they rank the teams halfway through the season or from season to season. It doesn't really make any sense. And you can't tell me that a team like BYU, who for some reason started the preseason ranked outside the top 25, even though they finished the season ranked 13 last year. I know they had, some question marks at the quarterback position, but they quickly figured them out. But you can't tell me that if they didn't start ranked, or at least in the top 20, that they wouldn't have been higher by the time that they got to the conference championship game. And then you have other teams, especially in the SEC, who start out high and they just consistently seem to just still hover in the top 15, even though they never actually really prove themselves. They continuously lose to other SEC teams, and so they never have to drop very low. And the whole ranking situation, painting themselves into the corner, is what led to the biggest controversy of the CFP selection this year. The fact that Notre Dame, who was ranked ahead of Miami this entire year, even though they lost to Miami, then found themselves being kicked out of the playoff for not doing anything. And this is where I don't want to assume that people are malicious in any way, or that anybody has any sort of ulterior motives, but there needs to be at least a little bit more foresight, because from both CFP and from Notre Dame. Because when you think about it, let me just illustrate it to you here in a second. Notre Dame, their final game before the conference championship game, beat up on a week 4-7 Stanford team, as they should, and finished the season on, I think it was a 10-game winning streak after dropping both their ranked matches close at the beginning of the season, one of them to Miami. But then you have Alabama, who has been struggling recently, lost to Oklahoma, and then struggles to put away a 5-7 Auburn team, yet they jump Notre Dame in the rankings. So now you have a situation where Alabama's ranked 9, Notre Dame is ranked 10 going into conference championship games. And if there was any sort of foresight, then everyone should have recognized that Notre Dame was in trouble regardless of what was going to happen. There was always this talk of, well, we can't put Miami ahead of Notre Dame. They're not close enough in the rankings. Miami's also dropped 2 bad games, but if they ever get close, that could be a consideration. And now you get into a situation where Notre Dame is ranked 10, BYU is ranked 11, and then you have Miami ranked 12. Regardless of what would have happened at the Big 12 championship game, Miami and Notre Dame were going to end up together. BYU was ranked number 11. They were going to jump if they beat Texas Tech, or what ended up actually happening, they lost and they fell outside, and then Miami and Notre Dame ended up together. And so really you had all these talking shows, all of these projections showing Notre Dame in the playoffs, but you knew if someone would have just raised their hand and said, yeah, this isn't going to end well, because you can't tell me that you weren't going to drop BYU if they would have lost. Like I said, I don't I don't try to blame or don't try to assume the worst. It's hard not to, but we'll talk about some of the hypocrisy of dropping if you lose your conference championship game. But what I will say is that we knew that something was going to happen, and all they did was just really create a scenario where it was going to bound to happen. You were going to have this controversy. And so you need to get rid of these weekly projection rankings. You need to have more clarity on how everything is playing out. And I think there just needs to be better awareness as to like what actually is going to happen. But I did mention that we were talking about the championship games, conference championship games, and there is a lot of hypocrisy on whether or not teams should drop if they lose their conference championship game. Now, you can see I got the BYU hat on. Obviously, there's some disappointment that BYU is not being included in the playoff, but I'm actually probably in the minority where I'm going to say that, hey, BYU had their chance, and they really, in both games against Texas Tech, didn't really showcase that they could compete and beat a playoff team. So I'm not as disappointed that they're left out. I think it is understandable, but I am just kind of sick of the hypocrisy that they show from one conference versus another conference. And what I mean specifically is Alabama. Alabama, I think in order to avoid all of this controversy in the CFP, they should have left Alabama out of the playoffs and included both Notre Dame and Miami. Alabama got stomped by Georgia. And something that doesn't sit well with me is when the committee comes and says, well, we couldn't justify dropping Alabama because they had beaten Georgia earlier in the year. To me, that is just a farce because you've already rewarded Alabama for beating Georgia. That's why they are ranked 8th, even though that they have 2 other losses. So you've already baked in their win, and so to say that now that you can't drop them because they already won, you are rewarding them twice for their win against Georgia. And to me, that doesn't make sense. Again, people, they pick and choose the criteria that they want to establish, and then they build a narrative around it. And I am going back and forth between conspiracy theorist and not conspiracy. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And this is the frustrating part about being a fan of college sports and why I just like the NFL a whole lot more. It makes sense. And I know it's impossible to make sense or make things structured of a college football playoff system, but that's another frustrating part that I've seen. One other thing that I feel like is interesting about this whole CFP is that take a look at Ohio State. They are ranked 2 in the rankings. Now, they technically got to choose whether or not they wanted to play in the Cotton Bowl in Texas or the Orange Bowl in Miami. But either way, they're pretty much, if they have a 50-50 chance of being outnumbered in their by fans in their bowl game. If they choose the Orange Bowl, and Miami beats Texas A&M, now they're all going to suddenly be outnumbered by all the Miami fans. And the same goes now in the Cotton Bowl, where they actually are going to end up playing. But if Texas A&M ends up winning against Miami, now all of a sudden they're playing in the home state of Texas. And so to me, I just think these bowl affiliations are just silly. They need to go, or at least we need to find a way to give some of these higher seeds one playoff game at home. It's kind of weird that you work so hard and you earn the right to have a first round bye, and then you have to go on the road. I mean, for some people, it's not really going on the road, right? Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. But you get my point. It's that Ohio State could be outnumbered by fans depending on who ends up if Texas A&M ends up winning. So those are kind of my current beefs about the college football playoff. So, how do we fix this? And I've always fantasized about they should restructure things based on geography, and we should align and have 8-10 team conferences or whatever. And I for this video and for this year, I'm just going to kind of skip that because it's never going to happen. As long as the conferences are in control, they're never going to actually restructure it that way. So I wanted to come up with some solutions that I feel like are manageable, that could possibly happen, and that probably should happen for the long-term health of this sport. Again, this sport has always had a terrible postseason format, so I don't anticipate anything changing anytime soon, but it would be cool if we went to some of these formats that I'm going to describe here. So the first thing that I would do is, as a governing body or the conferences getting together and agreeing, there needs to be a mandate that any conference that has more than 10 teams has to have divisions where they have a round robin and then a champion based off of that. So this allows there to be some consistency in scheduling. Now, there has been a lot of worry because, again, you might have a situation like what happened in the Big Ten for so many years, where you had Ohio State, Michigan State, all in the East, and they were beating up on each other, and it was a dogfight to come out on top in that division. And then you had Wisconsin, who just dominated because you had Nebraska, Iowa, Indiana, I think, Purdue. So it was like always Wisconsin, even though they weren't the better team, versus Michigan, the winner, either Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, those teams. And what I would say to that is, who says you need to have divisions based off of geography? Just reshuffle your divisions. If we can figure out how to make changes in the CFP every single year, then conferences can figure out how to change up divisions and conference scheduling. If you don't want to do it every year, maybe do it every 2 years, and then based off of performance in that 1 to 2 year span, then you rebalance the divisions every single year so that it's an equal strength, and the winner that you're going to get is most likely going to be the 2 best teams. It's not always going to work perfectly, but the way that works too is then you can then have some consistency in your scheduling, and you can have resumes that are a little bit more comparable. And so now that conferences are playing better schedules and more consistent schedules, then I think we do need to expand the conference or the CFP, and let's just expand it to 24 teams. There's quite a few at-large teams. It's not going to happen every year where you have this deep of teams, but I think still let's just follow the FCS format. Let's open it up to 24 teams. Let's give every single conference champion a automatic bid into the playoff, and then you seed based on strength after that. So if you want seeds 20 through 24 to be all of the G6 conferences, I'm fine with that, but just give everyone an opportunity to earn their way by winning their conference. And then you have 14 other at-large teams, which is totally enough, and then you start all of that on the weekend that conference championships currently are. So, people are concerned that the playoffs might last too long or there are too many games. If the FCS can do it, then the FBS can figure it out. Or another solution would be twofold. You could either eliminate a non-conference game, because all of these Power 4 schools are playing patsies anyways. So why don't you move that patsy game or the really competitive 8-9 game or whatever into a playoff? So it's just an extension of the regular season, but instead you just tack it on at the end of the season, and it's the start of the playoffs. And at least it's still going to be, it's actually going to mean something. And then, or the other option would be, now that we have divisions, then you have teams that, unless I think there's a team that like has exactly 10, a conference that has exactly 10 teams, which I don't think there's any conference currently that has that. So you can guarantee and go back down from 9 conference games back down to 8, and then you'll have one extra conference game to use it as the playoff instead. And I think by doing that, then you're not disrupting things as much, and you have a more balanced playoff system. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that sort of playoff would look this year. And I think, honestly, you're going to... I don't know who would say no to this. Okay, so first off, you have the top 8 seeds are going to get a bye, which then creates a lot of awesome matchups in the first weekend. So we start off in the top left bracket. You have Arizona playing at USC. You have Michigan playing at Utah. You have Kennesaw State playing at Miami. You have Western Michigan playing at Alabama. Then you have BYU hosting Duke as the ACC champion. Then you would have a rematch, Notre Dame against Boise State. You have Tulane against Vanderbilt, James Madison against Texas. So these are all awesome games. Now you're going to probably have some blowouts. That's something that people always complain about. Oh, these games are going to be blowouts. Dude, every playoff that we've had since the even since the 4-team inception, there have been blowouts even amongst Power 4 teams. You're not going to get rid of that. So why not just give everybody a chance and still just guarantee some of these high quality matchups just in case there is some awesome games. You just had North Dakota State in the FCS playoff get upset by Illinois State. They are bound to happen, and that's what makes college sports especially super exciting. Then you have them moving into the what do we call that? Not the quarterfinals, but the round of 16. And what I would even propose is that especially the first round is on campus, but even the second round, so that way the seeds 1 through 8 are guaranteed at least one home playoff game. I would even wager that they should get 2 home playoff games. Then you could have your quarterfinals, your semifinals, your finals be at bowl locations if you really want them to. But there are a few people who might, or I guess there are, you have your common objections as to, oh, this is why it wouldn't work, or this is why that format is stupid. The first one is, we don't need any more group of 6 teams in. And like I mentioned before, you're already playing those games anyways. You might as well just change it to be at the end of the regular season. And I'd rather give that chance to the little guys and give them an opportunity for that Cinderella story rather than giving it to, Pitt or whoever, these other Power 4 teams that are barely cracking the top 25. And if you take a look at like the current representation, like say in March Madness, which is a postseason that everybody loves, there's 31 of the 68 teams are reserved for conference champions. Right now, the 5 out of the 12 is reserved for conference champions. That actually equates to almost the same exact percentage. And if we jump it up to 24 and we reserve it for 10, that's the same amount of representation as we are currently giving the mid-majors there in March Madness. So I think it's plenty enough, and it's not going to make things that bad. As far as my thoughts on auto bids, I think other than conference champions, you don't really need it. If you are having competitive divisions, all of the Power 4 schools, the winners of those divisions are basically going to be guaranteed at least a spot in. And then the conference championship game is, people will say it won't really mean anything, but at least it's going to be for seeding purposes. But then I would, at that point in time, you have your Power 4 who are guaranteed at least 2. The other group of 6, they're only going to get 1. And then I don't know why you need to reserve more specific ones for the Big Ten and the SEC, especially if they're not that strong this year. So I think there's plenty of at-large spaces. You don't really need to give auto bids for that. The other thing is that people will argue that it diminishes the regular season, and I don't really think so. In some ways, I think it makes it exciting because more teams again are in play, and then from a consumer perspective, you might have less anxiety from game to game because it doesn't feel like every single game matters. But in the scheme of like the programs themselves, every game does still matter because you're going to be wanting to fight for that top 8 seed, or you're going to be wanting to fight for that top, what would it be? Your top 16 seeds, so that way you can get a guaranteed home playoff game. Or break it up even more, you might want to be fighting for that guaranteed like top 10 seed because maybe you don't make it into the top 8 and get that first round bye, but you want to be that, that 9 seed, that 10 seed, that 11 seed, so that way you can play some of these Group 6 conference champions that aren't as good. So really, the positions for each seed are still going to be very viable, and people are still going to want to push and be as high as possible in their seeding. The last claim that people might say is it will drag out the college football season. And like I said, if the FCS can do it, then the FBS can figure it out as well. You start these games on, or the playoffs on conference, where conference championship currently is, and you're playing every single week, you're going to have this done probably even before the current 12-team playoff is slated. So I know that college football is a different sport than the NFL, but right now I think that college football is shooting itself in the foot. No one is willing to stand up to the SEC, the Big Ten, or the Bulls and show them how their greed is going to ruin it further. Everyone's in fear that if they go off, that if they try and push that, then the conferences, those two conferences, are just going to form their own league. And I just think that there is one thing that college football can model itself after the NFL, and that is a league that is able to figure out a fair postseason for a 32-team league that only can play 17 games. They can create some scheduling consistency and then automatic bids for division winners. If we can at least start there with college football, then I think we'll never really get rid of people complaining, but at least I know that people would complain less. So there you have it. Thank you for joining my close to 20 to 25 minute rant on college football playoff. But again, let me know what you think and see if, what do you think? Maybe go down in the comments and tell me what sort of playoff format would you like to see? Is 12 great and you would just make some tweaks on automatic bids, or do you think there needs to be more or less? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd be happy to engage with you there. But thank you again for listening to this video, and I'll catch you out on the next one.